June 17, 1944. A scorched battlefield near Carentan, Normandy. The acrid smell of burning diesel and cordite hung in the air as Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann stared in disbelief at what remained of his Panther tank. Just days earlier, he had confidently told his crew they were invincible against American armor. Now, 3 of his men were dead, and his supposedly superior tank was a smoking hulk of twisted metal penetrated cleanly through its frontal armor by a weapon the Germans had dismissed as ineffective. Between his trembling fingers, he held a single brass shell casing recovered from nearby. The marking 76mm was still visible despite the scorching. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The intelligence reports had assured them the American Sherman tanks were underpowered, poorly armored Ronson lighters, or Tommy Cookers, as his men mockingly called them, named for how quickly they burst into flames when hit. But what Hoffmann witnessed that day would fundamentally change everything the Wehrmacht believed about their American opponents. November 12, 1943. A cramped officer's quarters at the German Army weapons testing facility in Kummersdorf, 25 kilometers south of Berlin. Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann, one of the Reich's most experienced Panzer commanders, sat across from Major Wilhelm Sternberg, head of Panzer Technology Assessment. Both men had earned their positions through demonstrated battlefield excellence and technical knowledge. Both had spent years evaluating enemy armor capabilities with professional precision, and both were now reviewing intelligence reports about the American M4 Sherman tank that seemed to confirm everything they already believed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Between them lay a stack of papers containing technical assessments, performance reports, and battlefield accounts of the M4 Sherman tank. The forms were bureaucratic, filled with tables of measurements, armor thickness specifications, and mobility data. Nothing about their appearance suggested they contained fundamentally flawed information that would lead to catastrophic miscalculations on the battlefield. Hoffmann's fingers traced a diagram showing the Sherman's 75mm gun and its armor penetration capabilities. This confirms everything we've observed, Wilhelm. The standard Sherman cannot penetrate our Panther's frontal armor even at point-blank range. Their main gun is wholly inadequate against our modern tanks. Sternberg nodded, his expression one of professional satisfaction. The Americans are building a mediocre tank in vast numbers, while we build superior machines. A single Panther can destroy 10 Shermans before they can close to effective range. The 2 officers had conducted extensive analysis of captured Shermans, test-firing German weapons against their armor, measuring every component and evaluating their combat capabilities against German Panzer standards. Their conclusions reinforced existing German beliefs about American equipment, mass-produced but technically inferior, designed for quantity over quality, incapable of matching German engineering excellence. "Look at this," Sternberg said, pushing forward a photograph of a burned-out Sherman. This was taken near Salerno last September. One shot from a Panzer IV, not even our best tank, and it burst into flames. The Americans call them Ronson lighters themselves, after their cigarette lighters. Lights first time, every time. Their own soldiers know the truth. This supposed nickname became a foundation of German confidence, mentioned repeatedly in training, used to reassure nervous Panzer crews facing the numerical superiority of American armor. If the Sherman was so vulnerable, then German qualitative advantages could overcome American quantitative ones. The journey to this moment of dangerous overconfidence had begun years earlier with fundamental misconceptions about American tank philosophy. German tank development focused on increasingly powerful guns, thicker armor, and mechanical superiority tanks designed to win tank versus tank duels. The Tiger and Panther represented the pinnacle of this approach. Heavily armored, powerfully armed machines that could destroy any Allied tank at long range. American tank philosophy, by contrast, prioritized reliability, ease of production, strategic mobility, and infantry support. The Sherman was designed to be transported across oceans, move quickly across varied terrain, and support infantry advances. It wasn't primarily designed for tank duels. This fundamental difference in purpose was interpreted by German analysts not as a different strategic choice, but as American technical inferiority. "The Americans simply cannot match our metallurgical science," Hoffmann declared, examining a report on armor quality. "Their steel is inferior, and they lack the precision engineering necessary for a truly effective fighting vehicle." This assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data. Captured early production Shermans had shown inconsistent armor quality, and their 75mm guns couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor in testing. Field reports consistently described Shermans burning when hit by German tank and anti-tank fire. All evidence suggested the Sherman was outclassed by German armor. What Hoffmann and Sternberg failed to understand was that the Americans were constantly improving their tanks, adapting to battlefield experience with a speed that German intelligence couldn't track. The Sherman they were analyzing was rapidly becoming obsolete as newer variants rolled off American assembly lines. Major Hans Diekmann, head of the Foreign Armor Assessment Division, who held the office next to Sternberg's, had expressed concerns about potential American adaptations. "The Americans have shown remarkable industrial agility," he warned during a staff meeting in October 1943. "We must consider that they could upgrade their tanks quickly if they recognize deficiencies." Diekmann's warnings were noted, filed, and largely ignored. After all, developing a new tank, or even significantly upgrading an existing one, took years in German experience. The Panther itself had required extensive development time, and even after introduction, it suffered from mechanical reliability problems that took months to address. How could the Americans possibly solve their tank's fundamental deficiencies in a matter of months? This dismissive attitude toward American technical adaptability reflected deeper misconceptions. The Germans saw their own engineering approach, meticulous, precise, striving for technical perfection, as the only viable path to weapons development. The American approach, pragmatic, incremental, prioritizing production speed and field maintenance, seemed inherently inferior. This cultural and philosophical bias colored every assessment of American equipment. Throughout late 1943, intelligence reports occasionally mentioned modified Shermans appearing in Italy with slightly improved capabilities. Some reports referenced a longer-barreled 76mm gun being mounted on some Shermans. These reports were acknowledged but deemed insignificant. After all, German testing suggested even a marginally improved gun wouldn't change the fundamental balance of power between the Panther and the Sherman. Even if they improve the gun slightly, Sternberg explained in a December briefing to Panzer commanders preparing for the expected Allied invasion of France, the basic Sherman design remains flawed. Its armor is too thin, its profile too high, its gun mounting too primitive to achieve the accuracy our Panzers deliver. This assessment was shared throughout the Panzer Force. Veteran commanders like Hoffmann incorporated it into their training and tactical planning. New officers were taught that Shermans were dangerous only in large numbers, vulnerable to German guns, and technically inferior. This became doctrine, unquestioned and deeply ingrained. By spring 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the Normandy invasion, German intelligence had developed a clear picture of what they believed they would face. Large numbers of the same vulnerable Shermans they had encountered in Italy, which German Panthers and Tigers could destroy with relative ease. Hoffmann, now promoted and assigned to lead a Panther company in the 12th SS Panzer Division, stationed in Normandy, prepared his men accordingly. "The Americans rely on quantity. We rely on quality," he told his crews during training. "Your Panther can destroy their Shermans before they can get close enough to be dangerous. One shot from a Sherman's 75mm gun cannot penetrate your frontal armor even at point-blank range." His crews absorbed this confidence, viewing upcoming combat with professional assurance rather than fear. They had superior tanks, better training, and tactical doctrine that maximized their advantages. The expected Allied invasion would be repelled because quality would triumph over quantity. German panzers would destroy the Sherman tanks in such numbers that the Americans would be pushed back into the sea, regardless of how many they brought ashore. This confidence persisted through the initial days after the June 6, 1944, landings. German panzer units held in reserve were unable to reach the beaches immediately due to Allied air superiority and Hitler's hesitation. When they finally engaged American armor, the first encounters seemed to confirm everything they had expected. In an engagement near Caen on June 10th, a company of Panthers destroyed 14 Shermans while losing only one tank to a flank shot. The standard Shermans, with their 75mm guns, performed exactly as German intelligence had predicted. Unable to penetrate the Panthers' frontal armor, vulnerable to German fire, and quick to catch fire when hit. The psychological effect on German crews was electric. Their confidence soared as their training and equipment seemed vindicated. But unknown to Hoffmann and other panzer commanders, a new threat was already present on the battlefield, but not yet encountered in significant numbers. The M4A 176W Sherman, equipped with the longer M176mm gun, had begun arriving in Normandy. Initial deployments were limited, with most assigned to independent tank destroyer battalions rather than regular tank units, which made their impact less immediately apparent. American commanders themselves had been skeptical about the need for the 76mm gun, believing the standard 75mm was adequate for infantry support, which they considered the tank's primary role. This contributed to the delayed widespread deployment of the upgraded Shermans. But as encounters with German Panthers and Tigers increased, the limitations of the 75mm gun became painfully obvious to American tankers, who demanded better anti-tank capability. On June 17, 1944, Hoffmann's company of 5 Panthers was moving to counter an American advance near Carentan. Intelligence reports indicated they would face a standard American tank company with the familiar 75mm armed Shermans. Based on previous experience, Hoffmann expected to destroy the American tanks with minimal risk to his own force. He positioned his Panthers on a slight ridge with good fields of fire, using the excellent German optics to spot targets at maximum range. The American tanks appeared at approximately 1,500 meters, well within the Panthers' effective firing range, but beyond what Hoffmann believed was the Sherman's capability. He ordered his gunners to open fire, and the lead Panther's 75mm KOK-42 gun roared. The shell struck an American tank, which immediately began smoking. German doctrine validated once again, but then something unexpected happened. The American tanks didn't retreat or advance recklessly, as expected. Instead, they took defensive positions and began returning fire with startling accuracy. Hoffmann watched in disbelief as a shell struck his lead Panther, not on the side or rear as might be expected from a lucky hit, but squarely on the front glacis plate. More shocking still, the shell penetrated, igniting ammunition and killing the crew instantly. "Impossible!" he shouted. "No Sherman gun can penetrate our frontal armor." Before he could process this, another Panther was hit. This time, Hoffmann could see the American tank that fired its gun barrel was noticeably longer than the standard Sherman's. The shell penetrated the Panther's turret front, another shot that shouldn't have been possible according to everything German intelligence had told them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Within minutes, 3 of Hoffmann's 5 Panthers were burning. The remaining 2 retreated, shocking the crews who had been told they were practically invulnerable to American tanks. Hoffmann himself barely escaped when his own Panther was hit, the shell penetrating the side armor as they turned to withdraw. That evening, in the battalion command post, Hoffmann reported what he had witnessed. "These were not the same Shermans we faced before," he insisted. "The gun was longer, and it could penetrate our frontal armor at combat ranges. 3 Panthers destroyed in minutes." His battalion commander, Major Gerhard Müller, was initially skeptical. "Perhaps they were flank shots? Or your tanks were not properly angled?" "No," Hoffmann insisted. "I saw it clearly. Direct frontal penetrations, and I found this near one of the American firing positions." He placed a discarded shell casing on the map table. It was clearly marked 76mm M1. Müller's expression changed from skepticism to concern. "We've heard reports of a new gun, but intelligence assured us it wouldn't change the balance significantly. In the days that followed, similar reports came in from other Panzer units encountering the new Shermans. The psychological impact was profound. German tank crews who had been told they were superior now found themselves vulnerable. Confidence gave way to caution, then to anxiety. By early July, enough encounters had occurred that a pattern became clear. The new 76mm armed Shermans could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at combat ranges of 1,000 meters or less, and its side armor at much greater distances. While not as powerful as the Panther's own gun, it was deadly enough to change the fundamental calculation of Panzer versus Sherman engagements. Intelligence officers at German Army High Command, OKHA, hastily reassessed their earlier conclusions. Technical reports were commissioned, captured ammunition examined, and battlefield accounts analyzed. The resulting assessment was disturbing. American industry had identified a deficiency in their tank design and corrected it within months, something German intelligence had considered impossible given their own development timelines. The psychological impact on German tankers was devastating. The foundation of their tactical approach, confidence in their armor's superiority, was shattered. Tank commanders became hesitant, knowing their Panthers weren't the invulnerable hunters they'd been led to believe. Crews reported mechanical failures and requested maintenance more frequently, sometimes using minor issues as reasons to avoid combat. Hoffmann, recovering from burns sustained in his narrow escape, was reassigned to a training role where his combat experience could be used to prepare new crews. The confident Panzer commander of June 1944 was now a somber instructor, emphasizing caution, respect for American capabilities, and the importance of terrain and concealment rather than direct confrontation. "The Americans have done what we thought impossible," he told a class of Panzer cadets in August 1944. They identified a weakness and fixed it quickly. Their new 76mm gun changes everything about how we must fight their tanks. The true significance of this development went beyond the specific capability of the new gun. It revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial and technical adaptability. German intelligence had projected their own development constraints onto their enemies, assuming that significant improvements would take years rather than months. What they failed to grasp was that American tank design philosophy prioritized adaptability and ease of modification. The Sherman was designed from the beginning to accept different engines, different guns, different armor configurations. Its turret ring was intentionally made larger than initially needed, specifically to accommodate future gun upgrades. When battlefield experience showed the 75mm gun was inadequate against German armor, American factories could switch to producing the 76mm variant with minimal disruption. They didn't need to design an entirely new tank, they simply modified their existing, proven platform. By August 1944, as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began advancing rapidly across France, the psychological advantage had shifted decisively. German panzer crews now approached engagements with American armor with trepidation, knowing they faced an enemy who could destroy them from the front. American crews, conversely, gained confidence as they learned the capabilities of their improved weapon. The German intelligence failure regarding the 76mm Sherman represented a broader pattern of miscalculation. They had consistently underestimated American technical adaptability, industrial agility, and pragmatic approach to weapons development. They projected their own engineering culture, which valued technical perfection over production, speed, and ease of maintenance onto their enemies, and this led to disastrous misjudgments. Hoffmann would later write in his post-war memoirs, "We believed our technical superiority made us invincible, that the Americans could never match our engineering excellence. What we failed to understand was that they didn't need to match us, they simply needed to be good enough to defeat us. Their 76mm gun was good enough, and they could produce it in numbers we couldn't comprehend. Our contempt for their equipment blinded us to the true threat they posed." The story of German tankers mocking the Sherman, only to have its improved 76mm gun turn their Panthers into burning wrecks, illustrates a truth that extends beyond World War II. Underestimating an adversary's capability and adaptability is a dangerous error that no amount of technical superiority can overcome. The Germans discovered this truth through painful battlefield experience, watching their superior tanks fall victim to an enemy they had dismissed as technically inferior. By the time German intelligence fully grasped the significance of the 76mm Sherman, it was too late to develop effective countermeasures. The war in the West had become a relentless retreat, with German forces losing tanks they couldn't replace to enemies who seemed to have unlimited resources. The psychological damage had been done. German tankers no longer believed in their invincibility, and American tankers no longer feared the Panther as they once had. The moment when Klaus Hoffmann held that 76mm shell casing in his trembling fingers, staring at the burning wreckage of what he had believed was an invincible tank, represented not just a personal tragedy, but the beginning of the end of German armor superiority. The myth of Panzer invincibility died on the fields of Normandy, penetrated by a gun the Germans had refused to take seriously until it was too late. The revelation of the Sherman's deadly 76mm gun spread through German panzer units with the speed of the very shells that were now claiming their tanks. But, late July 1944, urgent field reports from every sector of the Normandy front told the same story. The Americans had fundamentally changed the battlefield equation. What had once been a manageable threat was now a lethal one. Major Wilhelm Sternberg sat at his desk in the underground bunker that now housed the Panzer Assessment Division, having relocated from Kummersdorf after Allied bombing intensified. The walls were lined with hastily assembled boards covered in photographs, ballistic reports, and shell fragment analysis. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his uniform rumpled from days without change. "It's worse than we initially assessed," he told Colonel Franz Barkhorn, who had been dispatched from high command to evaluate the situation. "The penetration capabilities of the American 76mm exceed our projections by approximately 30%. At combat ranges under 800 meters, it can reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal armor." Barkhorn, a career officer with no frontline experience, looked skeptical. "Surely our initial assessments couldn't have been so wrong. Perhaps these are isolated incidents, or the result of manufacturing defects in individual Panthers." Sternberg's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "I've personally examined fragments from 12 different Panthers destroyed by frontal penetration. I've interviewed survivors from 27 separate engagements. There's no ambiguity left, Colonel. The 76mm Sherman fundamentally changes the combat equation." He pulled a file from his desk and spread its contents across the table. Photographs of destroyed Panthers, their frontal armor punctured by clean holes, shell fragments recovered from tank interiors, metallurgical analysis reports, ballistic calculations. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. But how could American industry implement such a significant upgrade so quickly? Barkhorn asked, echoing the question that had haunted German intelligence for weeks. "Our sources indicated they were committed to the 75mm gun as recently as last autumn." "That's what we failed to understand about American industrial philosophy," Sternberg replied, gesturing to a technical diagram of the Sherman. "Their tanks were designed from the beginning for modification and upgrade. The turret ring was intentionally oversized. The gun mount was designed for easy replacement. When battlefield experience showed the 75mm was inadequate, they didn't need to design a new tank, they simply upgraded the existing one." Barkhorn studied the diagram, his expression darkening as he grasped the implications. "And how quickly can they convert production to this new variant?" "That's the most disturbing part," Sternberg said, his voice dropping. "According to prisoner interrogations, they began large-scale production in January. 6 months from identification of the problem to mass deployment of the solution. In our system, such a change would take years." This timeline shocked even veteran German officers accustomed to American industrial efficiency. The development cycle for German tanks measured in years, not months. The Panther itself had required nearly 2 years from initial design to first deployment, and even then suffered from significant mechanical reliability issues that took months more to address. The Americans, by contrast, had identified a deficiency, designed a solution, tested it, put it into production, and deployed it to the battlefield in less than a year. This adaptability revealed something about American industrial culture that German intelligence had consistently underestimated. Pragmatism over perfection, speed over elegance, adequate solutions quickly delivered rather than perfect solutions too late. On the front lines, this reality was transforming the psychological landscape of armored warfare. Hoffmann, now recovered from his injuries and returned to command, gathered his Panther crews in a bombed-out farm building near Saint-Lô. The men sat on ammunition crates, their faces reflecting the strain of continuous combat and dwindling confidence. "The situation has changed," Hoffmann told them bluntly. "We can no longer assume frontal invulnerability against American tanks. The new 76mm Shermans can penetrate our armor at normal combat ranges. We must adapt our tactics accordingly." A young tank commander named Müller raised his hand. "Sir, if they can penetrate our frontal armor, what advantage do we still have? Their tanks outnumber ours 10-1. The question hung in the air, giving voice to the fear that had begun to permeate the Panzer forces. If the qualitative edge that compensated for American numerical superiority was gone, what hope remained? "We still have advantages," Hoffmann answered, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Our gun remains superior in range and penetration. Our optics allow us to spot and hit targets at greater distances. Our frontal armor, while no longer invulnerable, is still stronger than theirs." He unfolded a map on an improvised table. "We must now fight from prepared positions, using terrain to maximize our remaining advantages. No more advancing across open ground, expecting to shrug off hits. No more exposing flanks in confident turns. We fight from cover, we engage at maximum range, we relocate after firing." The shift in tactics reflected the new reality. German tanks were no longer hunters, but increasingly the hunted. The psychological advantage had shifted. American tankers, once hesitant to engage Panthers, now sought them out with their upgraded Shermans. German crews, once confident in their technical superiority, now approached each engagement with trepidation. This psychological dimension proved as important as the technical one. Combat effectiveness depends not just on equipment, but on the crew's confidence in that equipment. When German tankers believed their frontal armor was impenetrable, they fought aggressively, maximizing the firepower advantage. Now, knowing they were vulnerable, they hesitated, took fewer risks, missed opportunities. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, Germany's most decorated tank ace with 138 confirmed tank kills, recognized this psychological shift during a staff meeting at 12th SS Panzer Division headquarters in late July. "Our greatest loss is not in tanks but in confidence," he observed. "When my men believed they were invulnerable from the front, they fought like lions. Now they fight like cautious cats, always looking for escape routes." Wittmann himself would fall victim to a 76mm Sherman on August 8, 1944, near the French town of Saint-Aignan-de-Crampsnil. His Tiger tank, once considered nearly invincible, was penetrated through its side armor during Operation Totalize. The psychological impact of losing their greatest tank ace to the once derided Sherman reverberated throughout the German armored forces. By August 1944, as Allied forces broke out from Normandy in Operation Cobra, the German armored response was crippled not just by fuel shortages and Allied air superiority, but by this fundamental crisis of confidence. Tank crews reported mechanical problems more frequently, sometimes using minor issues as reasons to avoid combat. Command staffs became increasingly cautious in committing their dwindling Panzer reserves. General Lieutenant Heinrich Eberbach, commanding Panzer Group West, expressed this new reality in a report to OKH in early August. "Our technical superiority, which compensated for American numerical advantages, has been significantly reduced. The new American 76mm gun changes the tactical equation fundamentally. We now face not just more tanks, but tanks that can defeat our best armor. The psychological impact on our crews cannot be overstated." The intelligence failure that led to this situation became the subject of intense internal examination. At OKH headquarters, Analysts reviewed the warning signs they had missed or dismissed. Reports from Italy in early 1944 had mentioned American experiments with a longer gun on the Sherman. Technical intelligence had noted the Sherman's turret ring was large enough to accommodate a bigger gun. Captured American technical documents had referenced plans for a 76mm gun adaptation. All these indicators had been available but minimized or dismissed because they contradicted the prevailing belief in German technical superiority and the assumed limitations of American industrial adaptability. It was a failure not just of intelligence gathering but of intelligence analysis, allowing preconceptions to override contradictory evidence. Colonel Erich von Manstein, son of the famous Field Marshal and now serving in the intelligence branch, led this internal review. His conclusion was scathing. "We projected our own technical and industrial constraints onto the Americans. Because implementing such a change would take us years, we assumed it would take them years as well. We failed to understand that their industrial philosophy, standardization, simplification, adaptability, allows for rapid modification in ways our system cannot match." The implications extended beyond the Sherman versus Panther dynamic. If the Americans could so quickly adapt their tanks, what other surprises might be coming? Intelligence analysts now scrutinized every report with new urgency, looking for signs of other weapons improvements that might once have been dismissed. They didn't have to wait long. By September 1944, another American tank development began appearing in combat reports. The 76mm gun Sherman was now being equipped with a new high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition type. The T4 HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing round, used a tungsten carbide core that further increased penetration capability, allowing the 76mm Sherman to threaten even the Tiger tank's frontal armor at combat ranges. For German Panzer crews, this was the final blow to their remaining confidence. Even their heaviest tanks, once considered mobile fortresses, were now vulnerable from the front to the American tanks they had mocked just months earlier. The psychological impact was devastating. Tank commanders who had once sought battle now avoided it when possible. Oberleutnant Hoffmann witnessed this transformation firsthand during fighting near Metz in September. His company of 7 Panthers, all that remained of his once powerful battalion, was ordered to counter an American breakthrough attempt. As they moved into position, his radio crackled with the voices of increasingly anxious commanders. "Hoffmann, be advised." Radio intercepts indicate American armor, includes 76mm Shermans with the new ammunition. "Are we still expected to engage?" he asked, sensing the fear in his crews. "Affirmative. Hold position Delta until relieved." The engagement that followed illustrated how completely the dynamic had changed. When American tanks appeared at 1,200 meters well within the Panther's effective range, Hoffmann's gunners fired with textbook precision. 2 Shermans were hit and disabled, but the Americans didn't retreat or advance recklessly as they might have months earlier. Instead, they methodically took cover positions, using terrain to shield all but their turrets. Then they began returning fire with startling accuracy. A Panther to Hoffmann's right was hit in the turret face, the HVAP round penetrating despite the heavy armor and steep angle. Flames erupted as ammunition ignited, the crew having no time to escape. Another Panther was hit in the gun mantlet, the round penetrating into the fighting compartment. "All units, relocate to secondary positions," Hoffmann ordered, fighting to keep his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding. His driver reversed the Panther into a depression, using the terrain for cover just as they now trained to do. But the psychological damage was done. His remaining crews were shaken, their confidence shattered by weapons that shouldn't have been able to defeat them so easily. The battle ended with 4 Panthers destroyed and the Americans in possession of the ground. As Hoffmann led his 3 surviving tanks in retreat, he reflected on how completely the situation had reversed since June. Then, his crews had advanced confidently, believing in their technical superiority. Now they retreated cautiously, knowing they faced weapons that could destroy them from any angle. This pattern repeated across the Western Front through autumn 1944. German armor, once the spearhead of offensive operations, increasingly restricted itself to defensive actions from prepared positions. Ambushes replaced charges, caution replaced confidence, and still the Panthers fell to 76mm Shermans that continued arriving in ever greater numbers. The American industrial juggernaut that produced these tanks represented another dimension of the challenge facing German forces. By October 1944, intelligence estimates indicated the Americans were producing approximately 1,076mm equipped Shermans monthly, more than Germany's total monthly tank production across all models. The mathematics were inexorable. Germany lost approximately 160 Panthers monthly on the Western Front alone, with production barely able to replace half that number. American losses, while higher in absolute terms, represented a much smaller percentage of their available strength and were fully replaced each month. Even if each Panther destroyed 2 Shermans before being lost itself, a ratio rarely achieved in actual combat, the Americans would still win through simple attrition. This reality was expressed with brutal clarity in a situation report from Generaloberst Joseph Sepp Dietrich, commanding 6th Panzer Army, in November 1944. We no longer face merely a quantitative disadvantage in armor, but increasingly a qualitative one as well. The American 76mm gun with special ammunition can defeat our best tanks from combat ranges. Their production capacity ensures they can replace losses we cannot. The trend is not reversible with current resources. The German High Command's response to this situation revealed the strategic bankruptcy that increasingly characterized the Nazi regime's approach to the war. Rather than acknowledging the fundamental shift in the armor balance and adapting strategy accordingly, they doubled down on increasingly desperate technical solutions. In November 1944, Hitler approved the production of the Tiger II, King Tiger, an even heavier tank with thicker armor and a more powerful gun. While technically impressive, its 128mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at extreme ranges, and its frontal armor remained impervious to the 76mm. Sherman, it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of the strategic situation. Germany produced only 489 Tiger IIs during the entire war, with mechanical reliability issues limiting their operational availability further. The Americans, meanwhile, produced over 2,576mm Shermans in the last 3 months of 1,944 alone. The Tiger II, like the Panther before it, could win individual tank duels, but could not change the overall equation of the armor war. This fixation on technical superiority without consideration of industrial realities reflected deeper pathologies in German strategic thinking. The belief that qualitative advantages could overcome quantitative disadvantages persisted even as evidence mounted that the qualitative gap was narrowing while the quantitative gap widened. For Hoffmann and other frontline panzer commanders, this disconnect between high command expectations and battlefield realities created impossible situations. They were ordered to achieve objectives with insufficient resources, to hold positions against overwhelming odds, to counterattack with fuel allocations that barely allowed them to reach the battlefield. By December 1944, as German forces prepared for the Ardennes offensive, Battle of the Bulge, damage to the panzer force was evident in planning documents. Operational objectives were repeatedly scaled back based on concerns about encountering 76mm Shermans. Routes were planned to avoid areas where American armor was concentrated. Timetables included explicit assumptions about delay factors when facing upgraded American tanks. The offensive itself, Germany's last major attack in the West, demonstrated how completely the dynamic had shifted. German planners explicitly targeted American fuel dumps because they could not supply sufficient fuel through their own logistics. When Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead armored formation, encountered 76mm Shermans near Malmedy, they suffered heavy losses despite initial surprise and numerical advantage. After the failure of the Ardennes offensive, the remaining German armor on the Western Front was essentially reduced to a mobile pillbox role dug in, carefully camouflaged, operating as static anti-tank guns rather than maneuvering combat vehicles. Fuel shortages limited mobility, but the psychological impact of facing 76mm Shermans made commanders reluctant to maneuver even when fuel was available. In the war's final months, as American forces pushed into Germany itself, the once proud Panzer force was reduced to scattered battle groups fighting desperate holding actions. Panthers were increasingly abandoned for minor mechanical failures or fuel exhaustion rather than combat damage their crews, knowing that even if they could get them running again, they faced weapons that made their technical advantages increasingly irrelevant. The final irony came in April 1945, as American forces closed on Berlin from the west, while Soviet forces approached from the east. Intelligence reports reaching what remained of the German High Command indicated the Americans were already deploying their next-generation tank, the M26 Pershing, with a 90mm gun that could defeat any German armor at any range. The Pershing represented exactly what German intelligence had feared. American industry had not just matched German tank technology, but was now surpassing it. The 90mm gun was superior to the Panther's 75mm. The armor was comparable, and unlike the Tiger II, the Americans could produce it in numbers that would make it a common sight on the battlefield within months. For Hoffmann, now commanding a mixed battle group of 3 Panthers and 2 Panzer IVs near Leipzig, all that remained of his once powerful battalion. This final development completed the circle that had begun in Normandy. The Americans had gone from fielding tanks German crews mocked to fielding tanks German crews feared to fielding tanks that made the Panther itself obsolete. In his final battle report, dated April 14, 1945, Hoffmann wrote, "Engaged American armor at 0730 hours. Identified M26 tanks with 90mm guns alongside 76mm Shermans. Attempted to maneuver for flank shots per doctrine, but American tank destroyers had secured flanking positions. 2 Panthers lost to frontal penetrations at 900 meters. Remaining vehicles withdrawn to secondary positions but were unable to disengage due to American air presence." The report ended there. Hoffmann's battle group ceased to exist that day, overwhelmed by American armor and air power. Hoffmann himself was captured, his Panther destroyed by a direct hit from a 90mm Pershing round that penetrated the frontal armor as easily as his Panthers had once penetrated the early Shermans. In American captivity, Hoffmann had the opportunity to speak with American tank officers, comparing experiences and perspectives. What struck him most was their pragmatic approach to tank design and employment. They readily acknowledged the Sherman's initial deficiencies against the Panther and explained how quickly they had moved to address them. "We knew the 75mm gun wasn't good enough against your Panthers as soon as we encountered them," an American major told him. "But rather than design a perfect tank, and that would arrive too late, we improved what we had. The 76mm was good enough, and we could get it to the battlefield quickly. This philosophy, good enough now is better than perfect later, encapsulated the fundamental difference in American and German approaches to war production. German engineering culture valued technical excellence, precision, and theoretical perfection. American engineering culture valued practicality, adaptability, and immediate battlefield utility. After the war, Hoffmann would write in his memoirs, "We believed we were facing an inferior tank operated by inferior crews. We discovered too late that what appeared as technical inferiority was actually strategic pragmatism. The Sherman was never designed to win tank duels. It was designed to win the war, and in that, it succeeded magnificently." The story of the 76mm, Sherman turning Panthers into burning wrecks, represents more than just a technical evolution in armored warfare. It illustrates a broader truth about military technology and strategy. Adaptability often matters more than initial superiority. The Germans built tanks designed to win battles. The Americans built tanks designed to win wars. The mockery German tankers directed at the early Shermans reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of American industrial and design philosophy. They saw a technically inferior tank and assumed this reflected American inability to build something better. What they failed to grasp was that the Americans could have built something better from the beginning, but chose instead to build something adequate in greater numbers, and then improved it rapidly when battlefield experience revealed deficiencies. By the time German intelligence fully appreciated the significance of the 76mm Sherman, it was too late. The psychological damage had been done. German tankers no longer believed in their invincibility, American tankers no longer feared the Panther, and the war's outcome, driven by these shifts, in battlefield psychology as much as by industrial production figures, was increasingly inevitable. The moment when Klaus Hoffmann held that first 76mm shell casing in his trembling fingers, staring at the burning wreck of what he had believed was an invincible tank, marked not just a personal revelation, but the beginning of the end for German armour superiority. The Panther, once the pride of the Panzer Force, had met its match in a tank its crews had mocked just months earlier, a hard lesson in the dangers of underestimating an adaptive enemy. The implications of the 76mm Sherman's success against German armour extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations. By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, military analysts on both sides were drawing broader conclusions about the nature of industrial warfare and technological adaptation that would shape military thinking for decades to come. In a prison camp near Frankfurt, now under American control, Hoffmann found himself among dozens of captured Panzer officers. Their conversations inevitably turned to the shocking reversal they had experienced from confident hunters to vulnerable prey in less than a year. The psychological trauma was evident in their discussions, which often carried a tone of bewildered betrayal. "We were told our tanks were superior," lamented Hauptmann Werner Schultz, formerly of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. "We believed it completely. When my first Panther was penetrated frontally by a Sherman, I thought it must be a manufacturing defect or a lucky hit. By the time I realized it was neither, I had lost half my company." Hoffmann nodded in understanding. "The tragedy is that our tanks were superior in isolation. Put a Panther against a 75mm Sherman in perfect conditions, and the Panther wins every time. But warfare isn't conducted in isolation or perfect conditions. It's about systems, adaptation, and industrial capacity." This insight that technical superiority in individual weapons systems means little without the industrial capacity to produce them in sufficient numbers, and the strategic flexibility to adapt them rapidly, became central to post-war military doctrine on both sides of the major, emerging Cold War. The lesson of the 76mm Sherman versus the Panther was not that better tanks win wars, but that adaptable industrial systems win wars. American Captain Robert Sorensen, an intelligence officer tasked with interviewing captured German tank commanders, recognized the significance of these discussions. His report, dated March 1945, noted, "The psychological impact of our 76mm gun may exceed its technical impact. German commanders speak of it as the moment they realized their qualitative edge was temporary, while our quantitative edge was permanent." This realization fundamentally altered their tactical approach and strategic confidence. This psychological dimension represented a crucial aspect of battlefield effectiveness that technical specifications could not capture. Combat performance depends not just on a weapon's capabilities, but on the crew's confidence in those capabilities. When German tankers believed their frontal armor was impenetrable, they fought aggressively, maximizing their firepower advantage. When that belief was shattered, their effectiveness diminished, even in situations where they still held technical advantages. For American commanders, the success of the 76mm Sherman validated their approach to tank warfare. General George S. Patton, perhaps America's most aggressive and successful tank commander, explicitly recognized this in a staff meeting in February 1945. "The Sherman was never intended to fight other tanks, that's what tank destroyers are for. The Sherman was designed to support infantry, exploit breakthroughs, and disrupt enemy rear areas. That we've now given it the ability to fight tanks effectively is a bonus, not a primary mission." This pragmatic approach contrasted sharply with German tank doctrine, which increasingly focused on creating the perfect tank-killing tank at the expense of strategic mobility, reliability, and production efficiency. The Tiger II, with its massive 128mm gun and 150mm frontal armor, could defeat any Allied tank at extreme ranges. But Germany could only produce 489 of them during the entire war, and many broke down before reaching the battlefield due to their excessive weight and mechanical complexity. By contrast, American factories produced 49,234 Shermans of all variants, with thousands converted to the 76mm gun when experience showed the need. This adaptability, the ability to recognize a deficiency and rapidly correct it, proved more decisive than any technical specification. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany in March and April 1945, they encountered increasingly desperate German resistance. The remaining panzer forces were organized into ad hoc battle groups, often combining different tank types, assault guns, and infantry in whatever combination local commanders could assemble from available forces. Hoffmann, released from the prisoner camp under unusual circumstances when American forces needed his expertise to identify German tank positions near Leipzig, witnessed the final dissolution of Germany's once proud Panzer force. Riding in an American jeep with Captain Ronson, he saw abandoned Panthers and Tigers along roadsides not destroyed in combat, but simply out of fuel or suffering minor mechanical failures their crews couldn't repair due to lack of spare parts. "They're not even bothering to destroy them properly," he noted with professional dismay. 3 months ago, crews would have rigged demolition charges rather than abandon a functional Panther. Now they simply walk away. Sorensen nodded. "We're finding intact Panthers with full ammunition loads. Their crews abandon them when they run out of fuel, knowing they can't be recovered. It's as though they've lost faith in the machines themselves." This observation cut to the heart of the psychological transformation that had occurred since the first 76mm Shermans appeared in Normandy. German tank crews no longer believed in the invincibility of their machines. When a Panther broke down, they didn't fight desperately to repair it. They abandoned it, believing it would only be destroyed by 76mm fire, even if they got it running again. The American advance toward Berlin in April 1945 encountered one final German tank development that illustrated both the technical brilliance and strategic blindness of Nazi Germany's approach to armored warfare. The Jagdtiger, hunting tiger, mounted a massive 128mm gun on a heavily armored chassis based on the Tiger II. With 250mm frontal armor, it was essentially impervious to any Allied tank gun, including the American 90mm. Yet, despite its impressive specifications, the Jagdtiger achieved little battlefield impact. Only 88 were built. Many broke down due to mechanical problems caused by their excessive weight, 70 tons. Their massive size made them difficult to transport and impossible to hide effectively. Their limited mobility restricted them to defensive operations on favorable terrain, and the desperate fuel situation in 1945 Germany meant many never moved from their initial positions. Hoffmann had the opportunity to examine a captured Jagdtiger at an American collection point for enemy equipment. Standing beside the massive vehicle, he felt a complex mix of professional admiration and strategic despair. "It's the perfect expression of everything wrong with our approach," he told Sorensen. "Technically brilliant, tactically formidable, and strategically irrelevant. We built the ultimate tank-killing machine at a time when we needed reliable, fuel-efficient tanks that could be produced by the thousands." Sorensen ran his hand along the Jagdtiger's massive gun barrel. "Our intelligence estimated that if the entire production of these had been concentrated in a single sector, they could have held a 10-kilometer front for perhaps 3 days before being flanked or overwhelmed. 3 days at enormous resource cost," Hoffmann agreed. "Resources that could have produced hundreds of simpler vehicles." This exchange highlighted the fundamental difference in American and German approaches to tank warfare. The Germans pursued technical perfection, the ultimate expression of armored firepower and protection, while the Americans pursued operational effectiveness through simplicity, reliability, adaptability, and mass production. The story of the 76mm, Sherman's success against the Panther, represents more than just a technical evolution in tank design. It illustrates a broader truth about military technology and industrial warfare. The most effective weapon is not necessarily the most technically advanced, but the one that can be produced in sufficient numbers, adapted rapidly to battlefield lessons, and deployed where needed when needed. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered unconditionally, Hoffmann found himself in an unusual position for a captured enemy officer. His technical expertise and candid assessments had made him valuable to American intelligence officers seeking to understand the psychological impact of the 76mm Sherman on German tank forces. He was transferred to a special facility where technical experts from both sides examined captured equipment and documented lessons learned. During one such session, examining a Panther alongside an M4, a 3E8 Easy 8 Sherman with the 76mm gun, Hoffmann articulated the central lesson he had drawn from his combat experience. The perfect is the enemy of the good enough. We built Panthers that could win any one-on-one tank duel, but we could never build enough of them. You built Shermans that were vulnerable individually but overwhelmed us collectively, and then improved them faster than we could adapt our tactics. An American colonel named Hayes, who had commanded a tank battalion equipped with 76mm Shermans during the Normandy breakout, nodded in agreement. We lost Shermans every day, far more than you lost Panthers in raw numbers. But we could replace every loss within days. When you lost a Panther, it was gone forever. This exchange captured the mathematical reality that had proven decisive on the battlefield. American tank losses in the European theatre were approximately 4,000. 500 Shermans, nearly twice the total number of Panthers produced during the entire war. But American industry produced more than 49,000 Shermans, allowing complete replacement of losses while continuously expanding available strength. The war had become one of attrition, and in such a conflict, production capacity matters more than technical specifications. The 76mm gun succeeded not just because it could penetrate Panther armor, but because it could be deployed in overwhelming numbers on a proven, reliable chassis. For the American military, the lessons of the Sherman versus Panther experience shaped post-war tank development profoundly. The M26 Pershing, which began reaching Europe in the war's final months, represented a more balanced approach, incorporating lessons from the Panther's protection and firepower, while maintaining American emphasis on reliability and strategic mobility. More significantly, American military procurement embraced the concept of continuous improvement rather than revolutionary leaps. New tank designs would be evolutionary rather than revolutionary, with built-in capacity for upgrading guns, engines, armor, and fire control systems as technology advanced. This approach, directly influenced by the success of the 76mm Sherman upgrade program, allowed tanks to remain relevant through decades of service life. For Hoffmann, the war's end brought both personal and professional reckoning. After assisting American intelligence for several months, documenting German armored tactics and psychological factors affecting tank crew performance, he was released and allowed to return to a shattered Germany. Like many former officers, he initially struggled to find purpose in a defeated nation under Allied occupation. In 1950, as Cold War tensions escalated and West Germany began rebuilding its military forces under NATO, Hoffmann was approached about joining the newly forming Bundeswehr. His combat experience and technical knowledge were valuable to a force being rebuilt from scratch. After considerable reflection, he accepted, eventually rising to command a Panzer battalion equipped with American-designed M47 Patton tanks, direct descendants of the Pershing that had appeared in the war's final months. The irony was not lost on him. The officer who had once confidently told his Panther crews they were invincible against American tanks now commanded German crews in American-designed tanks. But he brought with him the hard-won wisdom of his wartime experience, emphasizing to his new officers that technical specifications alone do not determine battlefield outcomes. A tank is not just a weapon, he told each new class of officers under his command. It is a system within larger systems. Its effectiveness depends not just on armor, thickness, or gun caliber, but on reliability, crew training, tactical employment, logistics support, and adaptability. Never make the mistake we made in 1944. Never underestimate an enemy's capacity to adapt and overcome your temporary advantages. This perspective that warfare is fundamentally about systems rather than individual weapons became central to NATO doctrine during the Cold War. The Western Alliance, facing a numerically superior Warsaw Pact, relied on technological qualitative edge to offset quantitative disadvantage. But unlike Nazi Germany, NATO ensured this qualitative edge was sustainable, reproducible, and adaptable. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the 76mm Sherman versus Panther experience was its influence on the concept of the design spiral in military procurement. Rather than pursuing perfect weapons systems that would remain static for years, both American and later German military procurement embraced continuous improvement cycles, with weapons designed from the outset to accommodate upgrades as technology advanced and battlefield lessons emerged. The M1 Abrams tank, which entered service with the U.S. Army in 1980, exemplified this approach. Its original 105mm gun was always intended to be replaced by a more powerful weapon when technology allowed, which occurred in the mid-1980 seconds with the introduction of the 120mm smoothbore gun. Similarly, its armor, engine, fire control, and communication systems were all designed for periodic upgrade throughout its service life. In a 1978 interview for a military journal, Hoffmann, then retired but still consulted on Bundeswehr doctrine, reflected on how completely the lessons of 1944 had been incorporated into modern tank design philosophy. The Sherman taught us that the most effective tank is not the one with the thickest armor or biggest gun at any given moment, but the one designed to evolve continuously as technology and threats change. Today's tanks are designed not just for their initial capability, but for their growth potential over decades. This evolution in thinking represented a complete reversal from the German approach in World War II, which pursued technical perfection at specific moments rather than sustainable advantage over time. The Panther was an excellent tank for 1943 conditions, but its design left limited room for adaptation as battlefield conditions changed. The Sherman, by contrast, was designed from the outset for modification and improvement. The modern German Leopard 2 tank, first introduced in 1979, incorporated this philosophy thoroughly. Though technically sophisticated, it was designed with deliberate growth paths for its protection, firepower, mobility, and electronics. Through multiple upgrade programs, it remained competitive for decades, exactly what the Panther had failed to achieve. In his final years, Hoffmann occasionally spoke to officer candidates about his wartime experiences, offering perspective that textbooks could not provide. During one such talk in 1982, a young officer asked him what he considered the single most important lesson from his experience facing 76mm Shermans in Normandy. Hoffmann considered the question carefully before answering. Never confuse technical superiority with strategic advantage. The Panther could destroy any 75mm Sherman it encountered, and we believed this meant we held the advantage. What we failed to understand was that warfare is not determined by what happens in ideal conditions between individual vehicles. It is determined by systems industrial, logistical, tactical, and psychological. He paused, remembering the shock of seeing his first Panther penetrated by a 76mm round. We mocked the Sherman as inferior because it did not match our understanding of what a tank should be. The Americans designed the Sherman to fulfill their strategic needs, a reliable, adaptable, mass-producible tank that could be shipped across oceans and support infantry effectively. When they discovered it needed a better anti-tank capability, they added that quality without compromising the original design philosophy. The young officers listened attentively as Hoffmann concluded. The true lesson is this: understand what your weapons need to accomplish strategically. Design them to meet those needs while allowing for growth and adaptation, and never assume your enemy cannot or will not improve their own systems rapidly. We lost not because our tanks were inferior, in many ways they were superior, but because we failed to understand that technical specifications matter less than adaptability, reliability, and industrial capacity. This wisdom hard-won through the experience of watching his supposedly invincible Panthers turned into burning wrecks by tanks he had mocked, represents the enduring legacy of the 76mm, Sherman's impact on armoured warfare. It transformed not just tactical reality on World War II battlefields, but the fundamental approach to weapons development that continues to this day. The story of German tankers who mocked the Sherman, only to see its 76mm gun turn their Panthers into scrap metal, stands as a powerful reminder that military effectiveness depends not on achieving perfection at any single moment, but on creating systems capable of continuous adaptation to evolving challenges. The tank that prevails in combat is rarely the one with the most impressive specifications on paper, but the one supported by industrial capacity, logistical systems, and design philosophy that allow it to improve rapidly as battlefield conditions change. For Klaus Hoffmann, the moment he held that first 76mm shell casing in his trembling fingers became a turning point not just in his wartime experience, but in his understanding of modern industrial warfare. The belief in German technical superiority that had sustained him and his crews through the war's early years gave way to a more nuanced recognition that true military effectiveness emerges from systems rather than specifications, from adaptability rather than momentary perfection. The 76mm Sherman, derided by German tankers until it began destroying their Panthers, didn't just change the tactical equation on World War II battlefields. It fundamentally transformed how military forces approach weapons development, procurement, and employment. Its legacy lives on in modern military doctrine that prioritizes adaptable platforms, continuous improvement cycles, and sustainable qualitative advantages over the pursuit of theoretical perfection. In the end, the mockery German tankers directed at the Sherman revealed not American technical inferiority, but German strategic blindness, a failure to recognize that the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the perfect weapon, but the one who can rapidly improve an adequate weapon to meet emerging challenges. It's a lesson written in the burned-out hulks of Panthers across the battlefields of Europe, and one that continues to shape military thinking to this day. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.